In 1965, the world was evolving at a breakneck pace. As the Vietnam War, Cold War, and Civil Rights Movement began to escalate simultaneously, it seemed as if the pillars of society were beginning to crumble, signaling an imminent collapse. Despite the turmoil, not all was lost. On the hardwood of Westwood, an everlasting friendship was beginning, proving that tomorrow can be a better day amid complete chaos. In the mid-20th century, basketball took its first step into the American consciousness, due in large part to the extraordinary 7-footer. These colossal figures generally established two archetypes: the high flyer, who ruled the paint with rim-rattling dunks and crushing blocks. On the flip side was the aficionado of finesse, employing fall-away jumpers and fancy footwork to trick opponents. These stark contradictions posed an intriguing question: what if a player contained both facets? This tantalizing fantasy would soon become an awesome reality. On the streets of Manhattan, a dunking 6'8" 8th grader drew large crowds and the attention of coaches. His name was Lou Alcindor. He became more well known as Kareem Abdul Jabbar. His sheer strength was captivating, as he easily grabbed rebounds and blocks, foiling the game plan of opponents. Kareem also possessed coordination, which bestowed him with grace. This grace led to the development of a complete offensive game, which propelled him to the top of New York City's scoring list. Kareem conquered New York as his team won 3 straight titles, posting an overall record of 79-2. College recruiters came in by the thousands as they salivated at the ability beyond comprehension and the resume with first-rate credentials. Yet, it wasn't the talent or titles that made Kareem the most compelling high school player of his era. He was a figure of mystery, hesitant in talking to media members, which led to the portrayal of an aloof and chilly character. He also struggled in a team environment. Unlike his other teammates, who were strictly interested in athletic pursuits and common teenage interests, Kareem had intellectual longings that needed to be satisfied. He relished in classical literature, specifically Shakespeare, whom he quoted often. Unfortunately, his other passion didn't align with his colleagues, which made it difficult to find common footing, making the young superstar feel awkward despite his top-notch status. These insecurities would begin to boil within Kareem, breeding anger, which provided a set of problems. Out of spite, he began to rebel against coaches and teammates, to the point where his head coach would completely berate him in practice. This worsened the relationship further, as his companions deemed him as moody and disinterested. His shyness led to brief conversation with scouts, who always saw him as a means of basketball exploitation rather than a young man realizing and coming to peace within oneself. No one knew what to make of this enigma, which caused concern as to whether or not the phenom would cultivate his greatness or be relegated to the pages of unrealized potential. It was even more alarming when he signed with UCLA, a school that was nearly 3,000 miles away. Many sports writers wondered how the conservative, farm-raised head coach, John Wooden, would fare with the brash city dweller. Thankfully, Wooden was coming off his second national championship, so he knew what he was doing. More importantly, however, Wooden wasn't consumed with his sport. His top prerogative as a coach was to not only improve jump shots, but the overall quality of life for his players. In the case of Kareem, Wooden not only witnessed his destiny on the court, but the destiny off the court as well. This became apparent to the freshmen in their first meeting. Wooden took note of Kareem's major, which was English, fitting for a former English teacher. When Kareem entered the meeting, he thought the discussion would pertain to offensive and defensive patterns, not his academic desires. Thus, he was taken aback when the coach was discussing his major requirements. Now, this first encounter didn't precipitate an immediate connection, since it brought about confusion in Kareem. Nevertheless, it opened a door for both, as each gained insight into the other. This was the very essence of the relationship, as two grand people were able to appreciate unusual qualities, thereby adding substance to the other. Right off the bat, Kareem was fascinated with the style of Wooden. Rather than wielding a complex defensive scheme or a multitude of plays, Wooden reveled in the basics. By applying simplicity, Wooden effortlessly explicated messages that not only prepared the Bruins for opponents, but the curves of life as well. The sharp young center picked up on this right away, discerning that the philosophy operated on nuance rather than intricacy. This newfound lesson refined the small flaws in Kareem's play right away, as he transformed from a raw prospect into an unstoppable force. His debut was a box office smash, as he dropped 56 points against arch-rival USC, kicking off a golden era. Kareem continued to wow fans, averaging 26 points per game and 15.5 rebounds per game, becoming the first Naismith Award winner in 1969. It wasn't just the individual awards that generated an all-time legend. Wooden explained the relevance of cooperation and balance, which helped him finally understand how his teammates were necessary in reaching his goals. This elevated the UCLA program to new heights as they captured 3 straight national championships using Kareem as their main conduit. This fostered Wooden as a leader and coach. Wooden was fully aware of Kareem's mental capacity, since he held similar qualities, immersing himself in books like fine wine, as he described it. So rather than seeing Kareem's literary curiosities as a negative, Wooden encouraged conversation about prose and poetry. The coach felt he could use this as a means of influence and understanding. What Wooden didn't know was he was about to assimilate a new perspective. These conversations would eventually turn from one of common interest to emotional experience. This enabled Kareem to reveal the struggles he faced as a young African American in the 1960s. Wooden had been sheltered from this harsh reality, which had blinded him from the oppression many of his players had been battling. This revelation helped Wooden acknowledge that he could continue to do more for his players. These encounters planted the seeds for a relationship that was bigger than basketball. Eventually, Kareem would graduate and be selected with the top draft pick in his class, as he became one of the greatest players in NBA history. He won 6 championships, 6 MVPs, and used his skyhook to blow away every scoring record. Throughout every trial and tribulation, Wooden stood by his side, regardless. When he received criticism for his shocking name change, Wooden became the first to use the title, even though he had a differing faith. When Los Angeles fans blamed the struggles of the Lakers on their stars' disposition, Wooden stated simply that it was a matter of acquiring the right pieces. The Wizard of Westwood would continue to further his legacy, as he collected 5 more national titles and over 600 wins. Kareem would be instrumental in building the aura of the UCLA program. He would often help in recruiting, exclaiming that Wooden was everything a coach should be. The prizes would continue after the final buzzer, as each became a best-selling author and attained the vaunted Presidential Medal of Freedom. Wooden passed in 2009, and Kareem was right there again, being a pallbearer at his funeral. Kareem would write another bestseller, dedicated to his coach 8 years later. Clearly, this friendship transcended race, sport, religion, and age, which is why it lasted 50 years. On the surface, this appears improbable, since they were radically different. Despite this, each was able to recognize difference and see it as unique, as opposed to a point of conflict. This connection let 2 individuals of brilliance diffuse and trade ideas, originating an enduring platform. A platform that would raise each to glory independently. This story serves as inspiration, showing us that others can help us, and we can help others on the voyage towards greatness.